So we're continuing on in our first unit, which is Metaphysics and Epistemology. Metaphysics, as I told you before, is kind of the study of reality, the study of the universe. What is all this stuff made of? How did it get here? How does it work? Epistemology is the study of knowledge. How do we come to have a knowledge of the universe, of the world around us? How does that work? What are the conditions for knowledge? What can we know? How do we know that we know? What kind of reasons, justifications, arguments can we give for our views? Well, to investigate some of these questions, these topics, one of the first thinkers that we're going to look at in this class is John Locke. An extremely influential thinker in the Western tradition. And recently I've decided to make the move to start with Locke after Plato because I think his view is fairly commonsensical. So hopefully I can make it accessible for y'all today. What we're going to be exploring today is Locke's theory of knowledge. How do we come to know all of this stuff and how it works? But before we get there, I want to make some distinctions for you and give you some helpful terminology moving forward so that we can talk about these ideas together, because you'll see these distinctions and these ideas popping up in the literature that we're going to read, and it's important that you understand this stuff if we're going to have a conversation about this, and for you to better understand what these guys are trying to get at, what they're trying to say. In this first unit, where we're looking at nature and reality and knowledge, we're going to be looking at what are called descriptive claims. A description is basically a sentence about what the world is like or how the world works. But these are not the only claims that we see pop up in philosophy that thinkers research and make. Science is a descriptive project. What it's trying to do for us is to describe the way reality works, how this stuff get here, what all this stuff is like. You can understand descriptive claims by realizing that basically they're just explanations. Explanations of this stuff. We can contrast these kinds of claims with what are called prescriptive claims or normative claims. Does anybody here have any prescriptions that they pick up from Walgreens or CVS or something like that? What is a prescription? What is that? Yeah?
Like a medicine you're prescribed that you get like so many refills on.
Right, yeah. Yeah, a prescription is basically, a doctor signs off on this thing and is like, you should take this in order to get better, right? Whether it's with some mental thing that you have going on or some physical thing. So if a descriptive claim is an explanation or a description of reality, we could say that a prescriptive claim is about what should be or what ought to be, what you should do, how you should think, the actions that you should take. It's associated with these words should and ought. This is the realm of morality and ethics. When somebody says, you shouldn't lie to your boyfriend, Kayla, they're making a prescriptive claim, right? That's different than similar charges attract, dissimilar charges repel, right? Descriptive claims are about what is, normative or prescriptive claims are about what should or ought to be. This distinction is important because in this first unit, we're basically going to be dealing with these descriptive claims. But as we get into our second unit, when we're talking about what makes an action right or wrong, how we should live, how we should act, we're going to be dealing with these. So just keep this distinction in your back pocket. It's going to be helpful. It's going to be useful for you to understand what these thinkers are doing, what they're saying. Okay? So that's one distinction. Another distinction that's going to be incredibly important for our discussions in this unit, what Locke has to say today and what Descartes has to say, which we're going to look at on Thursday, is the distinction between a priori and a posteriori. These are fancy Latin phrases that describe our relationship to knowledge. Okay? A priori comes from the Latin meaning prior to experience. See, one idea that pops up a lot in philosophy is that there are certain things that we can know about reality without having experienced it. For example, if I asked you, if there are 30 people in this room, if all of a sudden 5 more people come into the room, is that more or less people than we had before? More, right? But you don't have to experience 5 people coming into the room to know that's more, right? Or what number comes after 3 billion and 6? 3 billion and 7. You don't have to count up to 3 billion and 6 and then make the next jump to know that, right? You don't have to personally experience that. You just know that based on the rules of logic, your deductions, your reasoning skills, right? So those kinds of things are a priori claims about knowledge, about concepts. The idea is that there are some things that we can know without having to experience it ourselves, because we have this reasoning capacity. We can infer, we can deduce, we can follow a chain of logic, okay? And that's all that's necessary for some forms of knowledge. We can contrast a priori with a posteriori. If this means prior to experience, what do you think a posteriori means? Right, exactly. After experience. In contrast to a priori, concepts, knowledge, ideas, there are going to be philosophers who say there are some things that you can only know if you've experienced it. For example, what a strawberry tastes like. Can you logic out what a strawberry tastes like before you taste it yourself? No, you have to have that experience to know what a strawberry tastes like. Or what the color green looks like. Right? You can't just deduce what that's going to feel like, what that's going to be like when you see green purely from logic. So this distinction is useful because the things that we're going to be investigating in this first unit, primarily knowledge, philosophers are going to have disagreements about how much we can gain without having experience, whether experience is necessary for certain pieces of knowledge, what kinds of knowledge we should rely on in our lives, and they're going to disagree about what forms of knowledge are more certain. Those based purely on logic and rationality, or those based on lived experience. This distinction is going to come up today, because as we'll see, Locke is going to give us a theory of knowledge in which he says, we come to know the world through experience. That is how we come to understand what's going on around us. While this can do some work for us, in some sense, it always needs to be weighed down by our observation, by what we sense, by what we experience. Okay, does that make sense? Okay, good. So now that we have those distinctions on the table, let's start talking about Locke himself. What he's doing in this piece, why we're looking at this at all, and what he has to say. John Locke was an English philosopher who is incredibly important in the Western tradition. Not only for the ideas that we're going to be looking at today, but also because his political philosophy. What came to be known later as classical liberalism, his views have come to form in large part the way that we think and organize ourselves politically in the Western world. Our Constitution and our Declaration of Independence are based strongly on some of his political views and his political theories. Here's a picture of him. Now, in order to understand what Locke is doing, I should give you some historical context as well. John Locke is a part of what we call the Enlightenment tradition. Is this a word you've heard before, the Enlightenment? The Enlightenment we can characterize as a period in European history. You could also call it a movement in which thinkers were grappling with some of the fundamental problems and questions of human existence, and they were trying to do so using their reasoning faculties. I'll talk about this more in a little bit, but it is a period that has profoundly changed the course of Western history, and the ideas and the views and the theories that came out during this time deeply informed the way that we look at the world today and how we organize ourselves. So, like Descartes, whom we're going to look at on Thursday, Locke is in this Enlightenment tradition. He has a certain lens that he's using to view the world, to work out these problems, and his ideas have deeply influenced the way that we think about things today, still. So this is a really important period to look at in philosophy and history classes. If you're trying to understand what ideas we have, what we rely on, where these ideas came from, so on and so forth. Now, let's talk more about this Enlightenment period. What was going on, what thinkers were grappling with, how they were doing that. We can separate periods of Western history, if we're looking at it through the lens of philosophy and the development of ideas, into a few different periods. A lot of thinkers trace the origins of philosophy back to the ancient Greeks and Romans. This is what we would call ancient philosophy. And their way of looking at the world and thinking is very different than ours today. If you know your history, you know that ancient Greece was a polytheistic society, so they worshipped many gods. There was this idea that there is the realm of human affairs, of earth, of flesh and animals, and there's this separate realm from humans, in which the gods reside. Gods, whom the Greeks thought were very similar to humans in character and disposition, but had immortal lives. So that was the primary thing that separated humans from gods. This polytheistic view, which was also steeped in a particular mythology, strongly influenced the way that they see the world and the beliefs that they came to. After the emergence of Christianity, in the West, that religion came to deeply saturate the way that intellectuals would see the world and think about the world, and medieval society as well. So we see a transition from polytheistic ritual practice towards worship, towards a monotheistic God, a one creator God who is all-powerful, all-good, all-knowing, etc. During this period of medieval philosophy, Christianity deeply saturated all the ways of life of the majority of people. Okay, what was right, what was wrong, the origins of humanity, what all this stuff is and our relationship to it, etc. As history and society progressed, naturally views would change, and there would be important historical events that would pop up and influence the thought and the lives of those in Europe and the West more generally. We can talk about the Renaissance period, which literally means rebirth. It was a time in which there was an explosion of knowledge and inquiry into science and art and music and literature. And it was something of a rebirth of intellectual life and a renewed vigor towards understanding the truth and working out all of our relationships to these things. Eventually, this would help give birth to what's known as the scientific revolution, which proposed that we can understand the world around us through observation and experimentation, through careful reasoning, and the use of this method would lead to a proliferation of knowledge in all these disciplines and the creation of a whole bunch of new fields, such as anatomy and chemistry, physics, engineering, and architecture. During this period, the view became popular that the universe is something like a giant clockwork machine that operates according to certain mechanistic and natural laws, in which phenomena is not random but operates according to certain rules and principles. And we could tease out what those are by doing experiments and observing things and testing things. So during this time, we see another explosion in Western humans' understanding of the world and what this stuff is and how it works. This, in turn, would give birth to the Enlightenment. And this is the period in which Locke is writing and towards which he is contributing. In the scientific revolution, there was this idea that we could understand the world better, again, through science, experimentation, and that disposition carried on into the Enlightenment as well. I like to characterize this period as a time in which Westerners are trying to unshackle themselves from the dogmatism of tradition and religion that had saturated Western society, and we're beginning to try to answer these fundamental questions using reason, exploring and investigating these issues for themselves. No longer taking it on faith that the world worked a particular way, that these mythologies and narratives and religions were just undeniably true. While the majority of Enlightenment thinkers were Christian, they thought that simply having faith in these ideas and views of the world is not enough. We should seek justifications for our views. We should try to formulate arguments for our positions. We should try to get to the bottom of things using reason, using our reasoning faculties. And as that was employed, again, we see another huge explosion in knowledge in all of these fields, in the natural sciences more specifically, and it would come to deeply influence the world in which we live today due to technological advancement and social development.
Would that be because Galileo and Copernicus?
Yes, exactly, yeah. And Newton and Francis Bacon and thinkers exactly like that. Yeah, exactly. A lot of the thinkers during this time were heavily influenced by those guys. Yeah, and the way that they saw the world and the methodology they employed. So the Enlightenment swept through Europe like a storm, picking up a bunch of people in its wake, causing them to, you might say, take on maybe this mechanistic view of the world that I mentioned earlier, and this idea that reason is paramount. We should be rational. We should be applying reason in all the domains that we can, really get to the bottom of things using our critical thinking skills. Not just taking things as a matter of faith. Not just accepting what we were told before, but actually investigating it now, critically, consciously. This ruffled some feathers, because there were a lot of people who thought during this time and after this time that reason is not the be-all, end-all of human life. Passion and feeling is important. the arts and literature and music is equally as important as the products of reason and science, if not more important. And so we have the period of Romanticism, in which a lot of thinkers were rebelling against this idea that reason should be paramount and be employed in every domain of our lives, and that we should live our lives just according to it. They thought instead, no, this stuff that reason can't make sense of, like feeling and emotion and passion and art and beauty, that stuff matters too. And so we see a resurgence during this period of thinkers who are like, that's what we should be leaning into. That's what makes human life significant and worth it. Science and reason are cool, okay, but they can only get you so far, and they're not the be-all, end-all of human life. Well, as these attitudes and ideas mixed together, eventually it led to the emergence of what we might call modern science and philosophy, which would be, again, some sort of mix of these rationalistic ideas and dispositions, these romantic ideas and dispositions. And the time period in which we are living today is kind of some mix and evolution of all these ideas swirled together. And that's the kind of world that we live in now. And the way that we think about the world are influenced by ideas that were propagated and had evolved through all of these different periods. Okay? Some even go so far as to say that the essay that I asked you to read marks the beginning of this Enlightenment period. Although you might put it a little bit before that, with the philosophy of Descartes, René Descartes, French philosopher, but we'll be talking about him on Thursday, who's going to provide some different views on how the world works and how we come to know it that are oppositional to Locke. Okay, any questions so far? Okay, we're going to keep on trucking here. Now, what can we say more about this Enlightenment period? This important historical context that you need to grasp to really get what Locke is getting at, why he's making the arguments he's making, why they were successful. Well, what the Enlightenment seems to be a reference to, linguistically, conceptually, is this idea that the human mind and human life is lit up by the faculties of reason and its products. That reason illuminates the world around us so that we can come to a better understanding of it. This is closely associated with this scientific disposition that I talked about before. This idea that using reason in tandem with observation and experimentation, we can cultivate an objective, certain, conclusive understanding of things through hypothesis, experimentation, confirmation, evolution of hypothesis, so on and so forth, the scientific method. What these thinkers were trying to do, using reason and using the scientific method, was come to knowledge that was objective, viewed things objectively, and it was conclusive. It told us important, practical, certain things about the world around us, because it's based on logic. During this time period, as I noted before, a lot of thinkers began to lean into skepticism of authority, political and religious authority. One of the key ideas that came out of the Enlightenment is this idea that there should be a separation of church and state. These thinkers were swimming in skepticism of just taking tradition as a matter of fact. Instead, they wanted to reflect on it, see what was good, see what was bad, see if we could reform the knowledge that had been handed down to us from generations. Skeptical of revelation. which we might say is another theory of how we can come to know the world around us. The prevailing view up until this time was that in order to know this stuff and figure it out, God has to reveal it to you in some sense through the operations of the Holy Spirit within you. So this view, revelation view, became less popular, and thinkers again began to lean more on reason and rationality than faith. Thus, reason and the rule of reason became paramount in importance and in human life during this time. And this is still something that's with us today, right? What do people say to you when they think you're being unhinged? Be rational, be reasonable, right? Think logically. So this disposition, this idea that reason is important and we should use it to rule our own lives and figure stuff out is still with us in many ways. This is associated with another idea that came out during this time of the goodness and necessity of freedom, not only for intellectual life, but also for political life. The idea is that without reason, humans are just kind of moved to think and act how they do by their passions, by their feelings. But we have the ability to extricate ourselves from those corrupting influences and act and think in a way that is free from impulse, free from emotion, free from simply being determined to act in a certain way. Thus, it's unsurprising that this idea that reason provides freedom to us in our life would also seep into the political theory at the time as well. During this Enlightenment period, and based in part on a lot of John Locke's philosophy, the idea of individual rights was born. That humans have some natural rights that ought not to be infringed, no matter who's in power, no matter who's ruling. There was a shift away from the belief in the divine right of kings, that the monarch was a chosen representative of God and derived their legitimacy from that appointment, to the idea that actually consent doesn't come from the top down, it comes from the bottom up. It is the individuals in society consenting to a certain way of life and living according to certain rules that should form the authority and legitimacy of government. So, reason, freedom, science, these are all important themes and ideas that flowed from this period and that still influence our lives today, including U.S. political theory and its founding and all of that. What does Locke present in this piece? What's he trying to get at? Well, again, he's trying to provide us with a theory of knowledge. It's deeply influenced by these Enlightenment things that we've been talking about this whole time. What he spends a lot of time in this book doing is describing how experience clues us into the nature of reality and how experience, properly guided by reason, is going to be able to figure a bunch of stuff out, solve a lot of problems. So Locke isn't interested in just coming up with these spider webs of abstractions that are disconnected from human life. He's interested in providing a reasonable theory of knowledge that is grounded in reality and our sensations, what we see, feel, smell, touch, and hear. Did I miss one? Taste. That stuff. What he does in this piece is he tries to describe for us how we can come to knowledge of things. And the way that he does that is he talks about ideas. We have certain ideas and conceptions of the world. Locke tries to describe for us where those ideas come from, how and why we can rely on them for knowledge, and what their relationship is like to the stuff out there in the world. Nature and tables and chairs and atoms and so forth. As we'll see, he presents what I think is a pretty common sense view of how we can come to know the world around us. Hopefully I can make it accessible for you today. But I'd like to also add that what I'm basically going to be presenting in every lecture is a gross oversimplification of these people's views. Okay? Because we don't have all the time to get into the nitty-gritty. Okay? Locke puts forth a view that is known as empiricism. This is an epistemological view, a view of knowledge. It's the view that we primarily obtain knowledge of the world around us through sensation, through experience, through our five senses. What we taste, smell, touch, hear, and feel. And see. I keep saying feel and touch. Those are the same sense. So, knowledge requires experience in some sense. You can't know anything without at the same time going through or having gone some sort of experience. He has what we would call a representational theory of ideas. The gist is this. There are objects out there in reality that have certain properties, and they cause us to have certain ideas. These ideas are mental representations, mental constructs of what's out there. And the kinds of ideas that we have are informed not only by what we are like, but what the object is actually like in reality, the kinds of properties and characteristics that it has. And so the mind traffics in ideas. All our knowledge of the world is filtered through our ideas and our concepts of things. And he defines idea thusly. Whatever is the object of the understanding when a person thinks. So, what your mind has access to and what you're flipping over and looking at when you're thinking about something or reflecting on something is an idea. It could be an image, a memory, something you imagined up, a concept. All of these things are ideas in the mind. And we come to a knowledge of the world around us by paying attention to these sensations, reflecting on the ideas that are formed in our minds, looking at them, turning the mind's eye towards the ideas that we have. Does that make sense? Because Locke has what we would call an empiricist view, he thinks knowledge is primarily obtained through experience, either through reflection or the senses. He has a particular view on how we get our ideas and where they come from. He denies that we are born pre-programmed with any ideas or concepts. Instead, we get all our ideas about the world from experience, from sensation, from what we see and smell and all of that. And so he offers us a common sense picture. Again, there are objects out there outside of us. They cause us to have certain perceptions and ideas. Because all of our ideas are formed within the mind due to our experience, he doesn't think that people are born knowing what's right or wrong, are born knowing the operations of math, are born knowing how geometry works. Babies don't come with that stuff. Instead, our knowledge of the world, our concepts, what we know, all our ideas come through experiences. We have experiences through our lives. Thus, we can say he denies the existence of innate descriptive ideas and prescriptive ideas. Oh, look, that distinction's coming up. In contrast to, say, what has been a fairly common Christian view, that the law of God is written on the hearts of men, that they are born knowing in some sense what is already right and wrong through their conscience. Locke has a different view. He doesn't think that we're born knowing anything. All our ideas come to us from without. As we'll see when we look at the philosophy of Descartes, not everybody agrees with what Locke is saying here, that we aren't born with certain ideas or concepts. And if you know anything about linguistics, Noam Chomsky, you might say, maybe we're born with certain neural structures or linguistic structures already. But we'll talk about that later. So, he says basically there are two sources of our ideas. Two windows that ideas are formed in the mind. Sensation, what we receive from our sense organs, our eyes, our ears, our mouth, our nose, touch, and reflection. We can also form new ideas and come to knowledge by thinking about the ideas and the experiences that we've had. For example, slap the table in front of you. Does it feel hard or soft? Hard, right? There you go. You got an idea of what the table is like from sensation. And then maybe throughout your life, every table you touch is hard, and you're reflecting on that, and you're like, tables are usually hard. You make a generalization. That would be an example of an idea or knowledge that you get from reflection. You generalize across the set of tables that you think you'll encounter. He has a view of human nature that's known as the tabula rasa view, which means blank slate. It's a Latin phrase. And the idea is one that I have been repeating again and again. All our ideas come to us from and through experience. So as we go through life and we touch hot stoves and we touch tables and we eat things and we smell things, our minds get furnished with ideas. Ideas and more ideas build up in our minds that we then use to make sense of the world. Thus, we are born as blank slates. We don't have any ideas at first, but then as we interact with the world, ideas come into the mind and our knowledge of the world builds up. What I think is cool about Locke's view is, contrary in part to this idea that reason and science is going to be able to fully explain and uncover everything that was pretty common during this time, I think he has a rather humble view. In some sense, what he says is the only things that we have access to are our ideas of things. So our knowledge is going to be limited by the experiences that we have. And in some sense, because our ideas are what fills up our mind and they represent reality, hopefully, basically all that we can know about reality is what we can derive from our ideas, or what our ideas tell us. So in philosophy, there's this distinction between reality and appearance, between objects out there in the world and our ideas of them. Philosophers have tried to bridge this gap in various ways to try to argue that we can uncover what that stuff outside our own minds is actually like if we work hard enough. But Locke kind of shuts that down and says, no, we can't really. When you touch a table, you feel hardness. You have an idea of hardness. When you pick up a mug, maybe you have the sensation of hotness. But your knowledge of what this is limited by your experience with it. So in some sense, you can't completely know what this thing is like in and of itself. Because all you have access to are your ideas of it. So, he says, our knowledge is going to be limited by our experience. Basically, all that we can hope for is to understand the world in a practical way, work with it, use it the best that we can, complete and true and certain knowledge of what all this is and how it works and how it got here is something beyond our understanding and our capacities. So far, so good? Now, what can we say about these ideas? How do they work? What are their characteristics? How can they clue us in to what reality is like? Well, Locke makes a distinction between two different kinds of ideas that humans have. Simple ideas and complex ideas. Simple ideas are like the basic constituents or building blocks of all our concepts, our views, our understandings. They're indivisible. They're simple in the sense that you can't separate them or cut them up into anything simpler or more basic. They're normally concerned with one aspect of a thing. This is Pierre, the plague doctor plushie, who has a cute little glow-in-the-dark lantern. Here, pass Pierre around. A simple idea would be something like hardness or softness. You can't analyze it into anything more basic, right? You have a sensation of hardness. You have a sensation of smoothness. Color, right? Color is something that's basic. You have a sensation of blackness when you look at Pierre, right? These ideas are formed within us from our experiences with reality. Do you like Pierre? Is he cool? And they cannot be created or destroyed. We don't make these things up. They are just formed in the mind through our experiences with things. So things like color, hardness, softness, whether something is in motion or not, these are simple ideas. The basic building blocks or constituents of all our other concepts and ideas. If there are simple ideas, what do you think the other kind of ideas is? Shout it out, yeah. Complex ideas, yeah, perfect. Complex ideas are basically just amalgamations of a bunch of simple ideas that is more complex, that has more stuff to it, that concerns more aspects of a thing than just whether it is soft or what color it is or whether it's in motion or not. For example, a blue ball would be a complex idea because you have at least two simple ideas there: blueness and sphereness. And in your mind, they are combined when you see a blue ball into a complex idea. Or a hard mattress. There, your complex idea is formed as an amalgamation of, the texture of the mattress and the shape of the mattress and its color and all that stuff. Does that make sense? So as we go through life and we have experiences, we build complex ideas out of these basic, simple ideas that are formed within us. Ideas are formed in the mind in various ways. If you look at the wall, what color is the wall? Look at this wall. What is that? Beigey, yellowish? I don't know. Whatever that is. When you have the idea now of that color of the wall, what did you use to get that? What sense? Sight. Did you use any other senses? No, you just used one sense, right? So ideas can be formed in the mind through one sense. Examples would be like colors and sounds. When you hear a beautiful piece of music, you're not using your sense of taste to form an idea of that piece. You're just using your sense of hearing, right? Or when you see the color of a thing, you're not using your sense of smell in apprehending the color. You're just using your sense of sight. So, ideas can be formed in the mind through one sense. Where do you think I'm going to go with this? How else can ideas be formed in the mind? Multiple senses, right. This is actually how your sense of taste works. What something tastes like to you isn't just using your tongue. It's also using your sense of smell. Did you know that? So your idea of what a carne asada chipotle burrito tastes like comes from two senses, the operation of two senses, your sense of smell and your sense of taste. Locke says extension is also like this, our idea of extension. What is extension? It's the idea that something takes up space. It is extended in space. It has a volume. When you look at the table in front of you, like say you're looking at it from the top down, all you see is a rectangle, right? Just a shape. How do you know it's extended in space? Well, you have to touch it, right? Because if you know how the eyes work, the eyes give us a 2D representation of our environment, and we use our other senses in order to determine that this actually has a volume and extension to it. It's not just a hologram or an image, a 2D thing. How else do you think we can form ideas? Think back to the two windows, the two sources of where our ideas come from. It's an R word. Reflection, exactly. We can form new ideas just by thinking about stuff, right? Combining stuff in our minds, reflecting on stuff. Ideas formed as a result of reflection are things like deductions, right? Discovering a new mathematical operation or doing a geometric proof. Right? You're engaged in reflection and you're able to show something or determine something through reflection, through this mental operation. What do you think the last way is? Look at these. All right, what's the last way? 1, 2, 1. Any idea? Ha. Sensation and reflection. You can use both to come to new ideas, to form new ideas. Locke thinks our ideas of like power and unity come from the operation of both sensation and reflection. You form the idea of power from your experiences of being pushed aside, of seeing somebody lift something really heavy, of watching strongman competitions, but also you form your idea of power not just through seeing that stuff, but also reflecting on, oh, what is that? What is this abstract thing? The ability to do stuff, get stuff done. Or unity. He thinks this is an idea that is formed through sensation and reflection together. So does this make sense? You still following along? I know you don't think this is important, and probably you don't understand yet why we're going through this. I will try to make that clearer next time when we compare Locke's view with Descartes' view. Let me just say right now, as a brief spoiler, the reason why we're looking at all this stuff is because whether you realize it or not, your metaphysical views, what you think this is and how it got here and how it works, and your epistemological views, how we obtain knowledge, inform all of your other beliefs, including whether or not you think God exists, whether free will is a thing, how we should organize ourselves politically, whether we should establish a communist utopia or be capitalists. All of these things ultimately flow from metaphysical and epistemological positions. And I'll make that clearer on Thursday. So, there are objects that exist outside the mind that have certain properties that cause us to have certain ideas. Simple ideas, then we use reflection to form complex ideas. Not all ideas are the same, though. And not all ideas, we might say, have the same level of realness or reality to them. You know this already if you've ever experienced a hallucination or felt a vibration in your pocket and you checked your phone and no, you didn't get an Instagram notification, right? You just felt that. Locke says that in some sense, a lot of the ideas that we have are the result of what the object is actually like in reality. The quality of an object. He defines it as follows: the power of a thing to produce an idea in the mind. All of these things that exist outside your own mind, tables, chairs, rockets, pens, they have certain properties. And when you interact with these things, those properties cause you to have certain ideas. Here's what he says about it. To reveal the nature of our ideas better and to talk about them intelligibly, it will be convenient to distinguish them as they are ideas or perceptions in our minds and as they are states of matter in the bodies that cause such perceptions in us. So we should distinguish between our mental representations of things and what things are actually like out there. Okay? Because those are two different things, right? That may save us from the belief that the ideas are exactly the images and resemblances of something inherent in the object. That belief is quite wrong. Most ideas of sensation are, in the mind, no more like a thing existing outside of us than the names that stand for them are like the ideas themselves. So a lot of people, he says, have this mistaken view that their ideas are a perfect reflection, one-to-one correspondence with what's out there. But he's like, actually, no. A lot of the ideas that you have, they don't perfectly reflect or represent what's out there. And now he's going to provide an argument for this, an explanation of this. Whatever the mind perceives in itself, whatever is the immediate object of perception, thought, or understanding, I call an idea. And the power to produce an idea in our mind, I call a quality of a thing that has that power. Thus, a snowball, having the power to produce in us the ideas of white, cold, and round, the powers to produce those ideas in us as they are in the snowball, I call qualities. And as they are sensations or perceptions in our understandings, I call them ideas. If I sometimes speak of ideas as the things themselves, please understand me to mean to be talking about the qualities in the objects that produce them in us. Qualities thus considered in objects out there are of two kinds. First, there are those that are utterly inseparable from the object, whatever state it is in. Qualities of this kind are the ones that a body or object doesn't lose, however much it alters, whatever force is used on it, however finely it is cut up or divided. Take a grain of wheat, divide it into two parts. Each part still is solid, right? You can't pass through it when you touch on it. Is extended in space, has shape, is either in motion or not. Divide it again, and it still retains all those qualities. Go on dividing it until the parts become imperceptible. Each part must still retain all those qualities, or what we might call those objective properties. I call them original or primary qualities, which I think we may observe to produce simple ideas in us, such as solidity, extension, shape, motion or rest, and number. Secondly, there are qualities that are, in the objects themselves, really nothing but powers to produce various sensations in us by their objective characteristics. Examples of these are colors, sounds, tastes, and so on. So he's saying, look, some ideas you have are caused in you based on the objective characteristics the thing has. The reason why you have a certain idea of this table is because, in part, the table is a certain way. It has certain objective properties, and that causes you to have an idea. But then there are these other things called secondary qualities that, when you interact with an object, it produces a certain idea within you, but your sensation, your idea, is not actually a part of the object itself. It's just something in the mind. So he uses color as an example, and we'll return to that. I call these secondary qualities. To these we can add a third sort, an example of which is the power of fire to change the color or consistency of wax and clay. This would ordinarily be said to be only a power in rather than a quality of the object, but it is just as much a real quality as the powers that I have called secondary qualities. I call them qualities so as to comply with the common way of speaking and add secondary to mark them off from the rest. The primary qualities of fire, that is, what the fire is actually like, its objective characteristics, its size, texture, and the motion of its parts, give it a power to affect wax and clay. And those same primary qualities give it a power to produce in me a sensation of warmth or burning. So, he makes a distinction between two powers that objects have to produce certain ideas in us. Primary qualities and secondary qualities. Some ideas that we have are caused in us by the objective features or characteristics of the object. This is what he calls primary qualities. So, for example, when you look at the laptop in front of you, you perceive it as solid. Your arm just can't pass through it willy-nilly as if it's transparent because it really is solid. You perceive that it's extended in space. It takes up space because it really takes up space. That's how it is. Its shape is objective. Whether or not it is moving or not is a part of the object itself. It's an objective property of that thing. And how many of the thing there is an objective property of what's there. So when you see one table in front of you, it's not just because you're making that up. It's because there's one table in front of you. When you look at the table in front of you and it's motionless, you perceive that it's motionless because it really is motionless. Does that make sense? But we can contrast these kinds of qualities with secondary qualities. Objects produce other ideas in us that are not actually a part of the object itself. For example, the taste of a thing. Does anybody here think cilantro tastes terrible? Does it taste like soap or something like that? Locke would say, your taste of cilantro is not in the cilantro itself. Your taste comes about by you interacting with it in a certain way, and it's informed by how you are and what your chemistry and biology and stuff is like. Same thing with color. We talk as if the color of a thing is an objective feature of the thing, but really our understanding of this is backwards. If you know anything about the physics of color, you'll know that the color that you see, for example, you look at the table, you call this beige or tan. The color that you're seeing is just a reflection of light at a certain wavelength off the object. And light reflects off the object at a certain wavelength and hits your eyes. And that's the color you perceive. But these tables are not really beige in and of themselves. It would make more sense to say their objective color is everything but beige, because it's absorbing all those wavelengths of light and not reflecting them. Do you see what I mean? It's weird. It's a weird way to think about it, but I think it helps motivate what he's saying. A lot of our ideas are not based on properties inherent to the things themselves. This is what he's trying to invoke with secondary qualities. So, things like colors, sounds, tastes. When you hear a piece of music, the sound that you experience is not a part of the vinyl record, right? The sound is produced from, I don't know, the way the needle rubs over it. So he makes this distinction partly because he thinks this helps explain our differences in perception. When we look at a thing, we don't all see the same color all the time, right? You remember that dress? Is it blue and black, or what was it, gold and whatever? You remember that? Or that soundbite that was on the internet a while ago? Some people are like, it's saying your Laurel, and other people are like, it's saying Yanni. What the fuck are you talking about, right? That's what he's trying to get at here, basically. He's like, yeah, some of our ideas flow from what the object is like in and of itself, and we broadly agree on all that. We agree there's one table here, that it's a rectangle, that it's motionless. But then a lot of our other ideas are different from other people, because the color of a thing, what it tastes like to you, what it sounds like to you, is not a part of the thing like shape and mobility and extension are. So, to recap, Locke provides us with, I think, a pretty commonsensical view of reality. There are human minds, and then there are objects out there in the world. Those objects exist independently of us. If you were to die tonight, this table would still be here. It's not going to disappear, unless I moved it. These objects, which have an independent existence from us, cause us to have certain ideas. In some sense, our knowledge of the world is limited by the breadth of our experience, the potentiality of our experience, whether or not our sense organs are working properly, whether or not we can use reason properly. Because all we have access to, at the end of the day, are our ideas, we cannot completely know what these objects are like in and of themselves totally and utterly and certainly. Because all we have access to are our ideas. But this is good enough. Because with our ideas, with experimentation, with reason, with using the scientific method, we can still come to an awesome and masterful understanding of how the universe works, and we can do stuff in it. Right? We can build rockets and computers and all this stuff, despite the fact that all we have access to are ideas. Ideas come to us from without. They are representations of what's out there, but they are not the same as what's out there. They're representations. The kinds of ideas that you have are going to be in part dependent on what objects are like in themselves, and what your mind is like, and how it works, and what your sense of taste is like, and all that stuff. This view is known as empiricism. We obtain knowledge of reality primarily through experience, through sensation. But that still allows us to do awesome things. It's cool, it's great. We might say it's a rather, humble view. Thus, because our knowledge of things is based on ideas, and we get all of our ideas from this stuff, we aren't born with any concepts or knowledge. We get that by living life, by talking to people, by having experiences. So, do you agree with the picture that he has laid out for us? That there are objects outside of your own mind that exist independently of you? Do you all agree with that? As we'll see, there might be good reason to doubt this. But we'll get there later in this unit. Okay, cool. So most of you agree with that basic picture. Okay, Locke's got you so far. Do you think that your ideas represent reality well enough so that you can move and work within it and do stuff? Does that picture make sense to you? Do you think that's how it works? Stuff forms ideas in our minds, and then we use ideas to think through things and make things and act and all that. Make sense? Yeah? Okay, cool. All right. Can you tease out any weaknesses or shortcomings with this view? Here's one question you might ask yourself. How heavily should we lean on personal experience and observation? Should we use a posteriori knowledge to construct our societies? Or should we use rational, a priori, certain, logical, deductive knowledge? Or do we need both? Do you think there are things that we can know just by thinking about them and deducing and using our reasoning? If you do, try to think about how much you can know from that way of doing things versus how much you can know from taking in the world around you through your senses. Is one of these a better way of coming to knowledge? Does one of these give us more knowledge? Reflect on these ideas, because they're going to come up again on Thursday. And we're going to look at a thinker who presents a very different view than Locke. Okay, questions, concerns, comments? Did I make this accessible to you? Does it make a little bit more sense now? Okay, if so, go back and read the text again. You'll pull so much more from it. And think about this stuff and talk about it with your friends and family members, okay? That's how you get better at doing philosophy. Is actually thinking through this stuff and talking about it. Okay, thank you. I will see you all on Thursday.